My best friend confessed his love. But I'm engaged! Speak now, and forever hold your peace. That's what the ceremonialist just said. Nobody said anything, but I want to. I never would have imagined this 3 days ago, and now I can't stop myself. Friday morning, I leaned back, exhaling heavily as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the balcony. The coffee in my hand was too hot, too bitter, but the swirl of cinnamon caught my eye. James remembered. The small touch pulled a faint smile from me, though it unsettled me too. It was a simple gesture, but it reminded me of the comfort we used to find in each other. Better? He asked, his smile teasing, his eyes soft. Caught off guard, I nodded, blowing on the mug before taking a sip. Perfect, I said, meaning more than I intended. We stayed silent for a few seconds, the familiar weight we both avoided settling between us, until James, looking momentarily pleased, turned his attention back to the papers in hand. The silence stretched again. I reached for the coffee, desperate to fill it. The rice is fine. It'll pair well with the meat. He tucked the papers back into his planner. Good, I'll confirm with the chef. Sounds like everything's going smooth, I said, but my voice felt hollow. I said nothing when he stood up to leave for a few minutes. Instead, I stayed where I was, staring at the mug, almost empty, like it held the answer to the question I wasn't ready to ask. Friday afternoon, we were in the garden, checking the chair placement for Sunday morning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hotel courtyard as I adjust one of the table settings. Then I saw him, Damien. His swagger was still the same after all these years. Sharp and effortless. 3 years, maybe more, since I seen him. Yet, here he was. Familiar, but his smile softer, almost vulnerable. James followed my gaze, his polite smile sliding into place as Damien approached. Hey, I called, my voice carrying more warmth than I intended. Alex, Damien replied, his grin wide and infectious as he pulled me into a firm, quick hug. His cologne, a mixture of cedar and something clean, hit me. Thought you'd forgotten your best man duties, I said, stepping back as James came closer. How could I, Damien teased. I laughed. James, Damien said, offering his hand. Thanks for having me. Of course. Glad you could make it, James replied, polite as ever. Damien turned back to me with a knowing smirk. So, Alex, still managing to keep this guy in line? Barely. He's a handful, I said, chuckling. Damien leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Remember the Vespa? What did you say back then? Something about his patience being more broken than the bike. I couldn't help but laugh. He didn't talk to me for a week after that. Because you were wrong, James cut in, his tone dry. I fixed it myself. Damien raised an eyebrow, throwing me a doubtful look. Did he? Not even close, I replied with a smirk. Damien's laugh boomed, unfiltered and magnetic for a moment. It felt like no time had passed, the years melting away under the weight of shared memories. This place makes me remember the disaster trip to the coast. The one you swore you rented a 5-star hotel, but it turned out to be a spooky place. I couldn't help but laugh again. You're never letting that go, are you? It wasn't that bad. He grinned. There was a literal raccoon in our food. Alex. He grinned. If I remember correctly, you were the one who didn't secure the cooler properly. He said ironically. Then it's my fault again. Then James cleared his throat, the subtle reminder of the present. Damien, thanks for coming earlier than expected. I know you were just confirming the catering and music today. There's a lot to do, Alex. Dear, can you help him check in? Sure, honey, I repeated. I gestured for Damien to follow me to the lounge. As we walked, he leaned closer, his voice smoother now. You've still got that laugh. I furrowed a brow, trying to ignore the way my chest tightened. And you've still got that annoying charm, I replied, keeping my tone as light as possible. He grinned, but his eyes lingered on mine, studying me, as if he was searching for something I didn't want him to find. He signed the papers rather quickly, and then out of nowhere, we were done. So, he said, you and James. This seems organized. Organized is James's middle name. And you? He asked casually, but there was a sparkle of curiosity in his eyes. I just followed his lead. He hummed. He's very thorough, doesn't leave anything to chance. And the wedding couldn't be different. And you? Damien asked. Do you like everything he planned? I hesitated a bit. but soon gave him a fake smile. James is great at all this stuff. It'll be perfect. Damien tilted his head slightly. That's not what I asked. I felt small all of a sudden. I wasn't nearly ready to face the layers of that question. I trust him, he hummed again, as if pondering his words. You've always been good at supporting the people you care about. His words hit harder, and I looked at the other side as I responded. That's what you do for someone you love. A pause lingered, and I felt 1,000 heavy things were unsaid. You seemed different, he said finally. How so? Quieter, he shrugged. Calmer, like you've settled. I ignored the pain again. People change, I said, forcing another smile. Part of life, I guess. Sure, Damien said. But there was a flicker of doubt and a mocking tone. I thought he would let it slip, but then he added, but you were never the type to settle. The words hit harder than I expected, leaving me momentarily out of words. You seem happy, he added, though his tone had a note of doubt. It's been good, busy. Busy, he repeated, and when he glanced at him, his dark greenish eyes met mine with an intensity that had made my stomach flip. That's not the same thing. The silence between us grew heavy, and I felt the weight of the unspoken words pressing in. You slipped away, he said finally, his voice quieter now. When you started dating James, I thought, maybe I wasn't enough. And I wondered what I did wrong. I turned to him, my heart pounding. Damien, I know, he interrupted, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It's the past. Forget it, I said, but the crack in his voice told me it wasn't that simple. Why did you even come? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His gaze met mine steady and unflinching. Because you asked me to, and because I wanted to. I forced my mind to change the subject. By the way, I said in my most neutral, happy voice, you still have a seat with the bride's family, which is mine, according to James, and you always change the subject when things get too real. Damien interrupted. I opened my mouth to retort, but James' voice called to me, breaking whatever happened there. He was near me only a blink later, and I tried to keep my cool. Everything's done, he asked. All good, I said quickly, as if I'd been caught doing something bad. Great, so let's keep going, Alex. We still need to talk about the cake. Okay, I replied, and waved goodbye to Damien. I kept my eyes on him for a second longer than I should have, and the reflection in his beautiful eyes felt like he could see through walls and the lie I'd built. And for a moment I wondered if I'd ever really buried those feelings at all. I left with James, confirming 1,000 pieces of information he already had. But still, when everything was finally done, we got back to our rooms, and I took a long, hot bath. After I sat alone by the balcony, nursing a wine of glass. The sound of people enjoying the hotel were clear, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying fragments of today. Damien's laugh, the way his eyes looked at me, the unspoken question behind those casual comments. By the time James joined me, he didn't sit down. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Damien seems well involved, he said, tone neutral. He likes to help out, I replied, staring into my glass. He didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was lower, as if he knew all my secrets. Are you sure you're okay with him being here? I looked up, ignoring how much he knew me. Why would it be? He sighed, then shrugged. No reason, just making sure. But left his words stuck. I could feel the walls cracking up. Saturday evening. Dinner had been fine. A mix of family and friends. Like a rehearsal dinner, but without formality. Everyone knew what James and I were. Practical. And they knew why. Damien was right. I'd settled, but I convinced myself it was the right choice. Damien and I had been inseparable since college. I'd been gay my whole life. He discovered my bisexuality in law school. I fell for him early, in the first year. I could handle being just friends, but the guys came one after the other. Each new introduction was a dagger. Still, we grew closer as roommates, and I buried my feelings deep, convincing myself he'd never see me in that way. Until one night, after too much tequila and dumb movies, I broke. I blurted out how hard it was being close to him when he hugged me shirtless. His gaze pinned me. What do you mean? Before I could stop myself. I love you. I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't let me. He leaned in, and I didn't pull away. That night, we crossed every boundary. I panicked, dodging his eyes by every morning, and buried it all again. Not long after I met James, Stable, trustworthy James. We were. 7 years later, marriage felt inevitable. He wanted to escape his parents' expectations, and I wanted to escape my past. Dinner had ended. James stayed in the garden with his family for drinks. I escaped to my room. As the elevator door started to close, Damien stepped in, catching me off guard. "Hey there," he said casually. "Hey," I replied, the tension thick between us. "Let's kill some time." I hesitated. "Sure." "The roof," he said, hitting the button for the top floor. When the elevator door opened, we climbed the stairs to the red door. I wedged a rock in it. "Once locked out, never again," he laughed. The sound pulling at something blurred deep. I stepped to the edge, looking down at the garden lights. The cool air carried the scent of pine and summer rain. Damien stood beside me, his profile sharp in the shadows. His eyes soft in a way I didn't want to notice. "Remember when he got lost coming back from the lake?" he asked. I laughed softly. "You swore you knew a shortcut, and you complained the entire 3 extra hours." "Of course I did. You were insufferable," I shot back, smirking. His laughter was loud and free, the kind that made you want to laugh along. I realized how much I'd missed it, how much I missed him. "Those were good days," he said, looking at me too long. "They were," I admitted, my chest tightening. Silence fell thick with unspoken things. Finally he broke it. "Why, James?" he asked, his voice quiet but cutting. "What? Why him? You've always wanted more, Alex. Don't tell me you settled because you thought you couldn't have it." My throat tightened. "You're not the kind of person who settles," Damien continued, cutting through my defenses. "You've always gone after what you want. So why not now? Why not?" His voice trailed off, and he exhaled shakily. "It's not that simple, Damien," I whispered. "Isn't it?" he challenged, his gaze never leaving mine. "Or did you convince yourself it wasn't because you thought you couldn't have me?" His words hit me like a freight train. "Damien, what the—" "I know," he sighed, his voice breaking slightly. "I know it's too much. Too late, but I can't let you go without telling you the truth. I love you. I've loved you for years, Alex." His words hung in the air, fragile and electric. "I know you, Alex, better than anyone. I know your feelings, even the ones you won't admit to yourself. And I think deep down you know us too." I swallowed hard, unable to respond. Why was he saying all that now, after all this time? He stepped closer, his hands gently gripping my arm, as if anchored me in place. "I'm sorry for 2 things, he said quietly. "2? "Yes," he answered, getting close to me and touching both my arms and not wanting to let me go. "Sorry for spilling all this, and I'm sorry for what I'm about to do." I didn't even have time to separate my lips to retort. My mind went blank when I realized he was kissing me so tenderly. All I could feel was his perfume and the taste of his tongue, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I jumped deep into it. It felt like I was in a water cave, out of breath, and he was the only one who could help me live. I melted into it until the sound of laughter down there woke me from my daydream. The heavenliness of it hit me hard, and I pushed him away. "I can't do this," I whispered. "Can't or won't?" he asked too gently. I had no answer for it. Sunday morning. The wedding was set for the mid-afternoon, and we were still in our rooms. James sat at the desk, his back straight as he ticked off the items on the endless to-do list. His pen scratched against the paper with precise, rhythmic movement. It was such an ordinary sound, but it felt sharp against the weight pressing on my chest. He was like the metronome in our relationship. Steady, unshaken. He was so focused that he didn't even notice I'd been staring at him for the past 5 minutes. I sat on the edge of my bed, running my hands over my knees, searching for something to say to break the silence. James, as usual, beat me to it. "You've been quiet," he said. Not looking up, I hesitated. "Wedding stress," I replied, hating how false it sounded. His pen paused. He turned to me, his expression measured, as when he reviewed one of his schedules. "You sure that's all it is?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "It's no big deal." He frowned slightly, more curious than hurt, which somehow made it worse. He sighed, resting his hands loosely on his lap. "We're a team, Alex. That's what matters most, right?" The word team felt rehearsed, like a line meant to reassure. Practical. Simple, just like him. "Right," I encored, the word tasting bitter. "A team." James picked up his pen again, flipping to another page. "By the way, I adjusted the seating charts so that Damien won't be stuck with your mum." He laughed. and I forced myself to do it too. Thanks, I muttered, gazing at the window. I felt I should. The last thing we need is awkwardness during the reception. I bit back a response by clenching my jaw. It's logical, of course. Speaking of which, he continued, did you want to include the small thank you speech before the ceremony? Might look good for both families, especially yours. My side of the family, I asked, turning to him. Well, yes, he said, not even noticing the shift in my tone. Your mom likes everything perfectly, and I don't want to hear any nagging about this. I'm planning each detail because of it. I laughed softly, but with no humor in it. Sure, James. Whatever makes the guest feel comfortable. He finally glanced at me. Are you upset about something? No, I lied. You have it all figured out. He smiled, oblivious to me, and I felt nothing much. And I'm also thinking about doing a joint thank you to the caterers. You never know when these good connections will come in handy. Good, I said. We'll get through this. The words felt like a betrayal, not to James but me. But he wasn't wrong. We'd get through this together, like we always did, right? That's our strength, our glue. Not love nor passion, just pure practicality. That had never bothered me until now, so. You should relax, babe. This is supposed to be a happy day, he said, returning to his notes and multicolored pencils. I forced a nod and glanced at the window again. The room was silent once more. But this time, my mind raced, and the thoughts and feelings I couldn't keep pushing away. Had I really mistaken this partnership for happiness? Have I settled? I still don't know the answer, but I knew for sure I was losing something. Or maybe I've already had. I decided to take a quick shower, trying to ease my thoughts a bit. I stayed there for half an hour, and once I got off, James was leaning by the window with a glass of scotch. Happy hour already, I joked, but he shrugged. I went to the couch and prepared myself for what was coming. He didn't laugh at my comment. Instead, he swirled the liquid in his glass. Alex, I want to tell you something. Of course he would. The seriousness of his tone sent a chill through me, and that felt somehow like a premonition. I knew Damien would be a problem, but I didn't expect it to go this far, he said quietly, taking a long sip. My heart froze. Did he know about the kiss? I panicked, but to keep my face expressionless. James, I started, but he held up his hand. I know you far too well, he said, his voice stained with sadness. Something's been off since he arrived. You're here, but you're not with me. And it's not just wedding stress. I opened my mouth to deny it, but he cut me off. I've known about your feelings for Damien for years. I let myself believe it didn't matter because you chose me. But now, his grip tightening on the glass made me sweat and feel like a hole was opening under me. Everything I've buried was sinking under my feet, and I couldn't stop it. James, I didn't, he sighed, his gaze heavy. If you didn't love me, you could have just said no. His voice went off completely, cracked, and the words hit me like a punch in the gut. His voice went completely cracked, and his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I do love you, I said weakly, but not the way I love you, he countered. His voice cracked again, but he held my gaze as though he was on the inside. I lived with that truth for a long time. If I'm going to spend the rest of my life with someone, I need to know they're really here, not holding on to something, or more precisely, someone. James. He came closer, standing between my half-open legs. I want you to be happy, Alex. Truly. And if that's not with me, I need to let you go. Tears blurred my vision as his words settled over me. You deserve more, he whispered, his hands warm over mine. And so do I. He kissed my forehead gently and stood, leaving me alone with all that to deliberate. Wedding. The spare groom's room was quiet. The sounds of my endless adjustments to my tie, trying to get it just right again. My chest tightened, but I ignored it. I took a deep breath, straightened up, and tried again, but my reflection betrayed me. Tight jaw, stiff shoulders, heavy eyes with thoughts I couldn't push away. This was supposed to be the right thing. James was the right thing. Stable, kind, trustworthy. That was all I could say about him, and I hated myself for it. He planned for everything, from where we'd live to how we'd grow old together. With James, life was straightforward. No surprises, no detours. I tightened the tie too much, and I tugged at my neck, forcing me to loosen it and start over. I shouldn't have called Damien here. I thought I could handle it. thought I moved on, but the memories of him, rich, unrestrained, drifted into my mind, so different from the quiet, measured world I'd built with James. So different from the quiet, measured world I'd built with James. Frustration bubbled up. I cursed the tie. Loose again! The answer was so clear. If things had worked out with Damien, it would have been smooth. Just like with James. That's how I should be, right? Then why do I feel so wrong? I refocused on the tie, convincing myself that James offered security, a life where I knew exactly where I stood. Then why did it feel so wrong? Finally, the tie was done. My reflection in the mirror was perfect. Just like everything else in this life I was stepping into. Perfect and lifeless. Why did Damien's presence make me feel like nothing had really changed? A knock on the door caught my attention and I turned, expecting no one but Damien. I wanted to scream, "Get out of my head! My life!" He entered and said low and calm, with his immaculate suit, "Figured you'd be here." I tried to smile, but I didn't succeed that much. "Shouldn't you be out there charming my relatives?" "Yes, but I thought I'd check on you before." His eyes analyzed me from head to toe, his smirk making me shiver. "You look sharp." "That's the point," I muttered, avoiding his eyes any longer. But he stepped closer. "Alex." His tone made me pause mid-adjustment. I leaned towards him, and the intensity of his eyes hurt me again. "Are you sure about this?" he asked barely above a whisper. I blinked, caught off guard, and expected at the same time. Both feelings were unpleasant. "It's a little late for that, don't you think?" I shot back at him. "Is it? Because if you're standing here, doubting it, then maybe it's not too late." A lump in my throat made it more difficult for me to speak. "James and I, we're good together." "Good?" Damien replied, stepping closer. "Alex, I'm not asking if you're good together. I'm asking if you're happy with him. Completely. Is he what you really want?" I couldn't answer. I was suffocating in memories of us. The way my heart betrayed me every time he was near. "Damien, I'm not trying to ruin your wedding," he said, shaking his head, but his voice trembling lightly. "But I can't stand by and watch you make a choice I know isn't the one you want." That finally made me catch my grip again. "You don't know that," I shouted at him. "I do," he replied firmly, "because I know you, Alex. I know. And I know the way you love. And this isn't." His words cut deep, and I just stared at him, waiting until he realized it was time to leave. He stepped back, giving me space, but his eyes never left me. "If you walk down that aisle, I'll support you. But even if a part of you hesitates, don't do it. Not for him, not for me. Think about you, please." With that, he turned and left. I had no choice but to keep moving forward. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, my heart pounding. And all I could hear was the nagging thought, "What am I doing?" I got up and made my way towards the music that filled the air with a soft and sweet melody. The kind that's supposed to lead a happily ever after. James was waiting for me in the aisle, his calm smile starkly contrasting the storm inside me. I felt like I might fall with the wrong man. The faces of our families and friends blurred in the background, not helping at all. Each step felt like a question. What am I doing? Another step. Am I doing the right thing? Another step. Am I doing this for me or them? Almost there, Damien's words echoed in my mind. "If even a part of you hesitates, don't do it." I glanced at James. His smile was steady but distant, as if he knew what was going on in my mind, but was too polite to say it out loud. By the time I reached the altar, my veins were on fire. The officiant smiled, her voice smooth and practiced as she began. "We are gathered here today," but her words vanished, drowned out by my doubt and twisting thoughts. I tried to focus on James, face the promises we made, and a life we'd built. But alongside all that, there was Damien's face, and our history, and the fact that he just told me what I'd always wanted to hear. "Speak now, and forever hold your peace." That's what the ceremonialist just said, and for a while, nobody said anything. But I want to. I need to. The words hit me like a thunderclap, and suddenly, I couldn't live in my own skin anymore. I looked at Damien to James, and I heard nothing but silence for a moment. Alex? James said softly, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I turned to face the crowd, searching for his face amongst all the familiar ones, until I found it. Damien stood by my side as the best man. His expression unreadable, but his eyes told me everything. At that moment, it seemed unfair, but I knew the answer. My voice cracked, and I looked back at James. I saw the hurt in his eyes. The way his lips were pressed together. But also something else. Understanding. Quiet and painful like a punch to my chest. Alex, he whispered, are you really going to do this? His eyes glistened with unshedded tears. I nodded, unable to say anything else. I couldn't bear the fragile hope in his eyes. And I knew it was my fault. I wanted to say something, anything to fix it. But all the words felt like lies now. The world felt frozen. Then James spoke again. His voice heavy, but without anger. Only that quiet ache of betrayal. It's okay, he said. I really thought we'd pass this. He was holding my hand softer now, letting me go slowly, instead of what I should have done for him. I'm sorry, I said, my voice choked. I'll survive. He took a deep breath, leaned in close, and kissed me on the forehead, followed by one last look, full of sadness, and the touch of empathy. I'll deal with all this. Go. And with that, our fingers split for the last time, breaking the reminiscence of our connection completely. Tears blurred my vision, and I ran towards Damien, towards the truth. I've been running for far too long. He had his arms already open by the time I jumped into him. I could already hear the murmurs, the crying and anger, but I knew James was there, protecting my back. Damien smelled my hair like it was the first pump of oxygen in hours, and I could understand that. I hugged him tight, trembling. Let's get out of here, he whispered in my ear, and I just followed, away from the crowd, away from my dearest James, away from all that could stop me and make me hate myself for choosing me after all. As we stepped outside the garden, and the sunlight and the air felt different, Damien stopped and looked at me. Where do you want to go? He asked, happy, but still careful about me. Anywhere, I said, squeezing his hand. As long as I'm with you. He smiled back at me and touched my face with soft tenderness. It made me want to cry again. That's the right answer, he teased, and then kissed me for the second time. In his arms, free of guilt, fear, and settling down. I never felt more alive. I was more ready to leave my old life behind and start a new one with him. Conclusion. The first few months after leaving the altar were wild. We had a lot of road trips together. Just us. Driving, discovering small towns, and cozy diners. I never laughed so much in a short time, and what was a confusing feeling to deal with. James and I were on good terms, though we hadn't spoken much ever since. From what I heard, he's happier too, and maybe he needed freedom just as much as I did. One day out of the blue, I received a message from him. He just wanted to let you know I'm good. Found my peace, hoping you're doing the same. I smiled at the screen, knowing that we both found closure. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. As for Damien and me, we moved into a good apartment with too much sunlight. It's not perfect either, but it's ours. I've reconnected with my art, my dreams, my ability to love without fear. This time, I'm not settling. I'm choosing me, Damien, and I'll keep choosing us every single day, building our new chapter one by one. The end. Have you ever let yourself live the love you've always wanted? Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.